Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we will review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Shabbat, pages 121 through 127. Kuf Chaf Aleph, 121. The Mishnah tells us the following: Katan sheba lechabot ein shomin lo, mipnei sheshvitato alehen. If a Jewish child, wants to put out a fire, to extinguish a fire on Shabbat, we do not allow the child to do so, because the child's obligation to rest on the Sabbath is incumbent upon us to enforce. The Gemara then asks an interesting question. Shemat mina, shall we conclude from here, Katan ochel nevelot, that if a child is eating non-kosher food, Beidin mitzuvin alav lafrisho, that the Jewish court has an obligation to force the child to desist from eating the non-kosher? We assume that that is not true. So how do we reconcile that assumption with the wording of our Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yochanan gives an answer. Katan haosel da'at aviv, that our Mishnah is referring to a situation where the minor child is going to extinguish a fire on Shabbat, a prohibited malacha, but to do so for the sake of his father's advantage. And so that we have an obligation to prevent. However, if the child were just acting on his own, without any regard for the wishes of the adults, then we wouldn't have to intervene. 122. Shmuel ikla be'avi Toran. Shmuel was visiting a certain place. And a Gentile came and lit a candle in that room. Shmuel turned his face away from the candle so as not to benefit from the light of the recently lit candle. However, once the Shmuel saw that the non-Jew took out some documents and began reading the documents by the light of the candle, Amar Adat denafshehu adlik, Shmuel concluded to himself that the Gentile must have lit the candle for his own purposes and not to benefit Shmuel the Jew. With that being the case, Shmuel then turned his face back towards the candle and no longer had any hesitation about benefiting from its light. 123. Tana Rabbanan. Originally, in the earlier phases of halachic history, the sages said that only 3 types of utensils are permitted to be handled on the Sabbath, and all 3 involve eating food at a table. So the last example is sakin katana gabei shulchan, a small knife used to eat your meal at the table. Then, hitiru v'chazru v'hitiru. The sages relaxed the muksa law several times over in the span of a few centuries, Ad Shamru, until it became true, all utensils can be handled on the Sabbath, except for heavy, large industrial and agricultural items. But that otherwise, all utensils can be handled and are not going to be in the category of extreme muksa. 124. Masikin bekalim, ben masikin b'shivrei kalim. You're allowed to use wooden utensils as fuel for a fire on Yom Tov. You can throw them into the fire to help burn the fire. But you're not allowed to use as fuel the broken pieces of a broken wooden utensil. So the question is, when did the utensil break? The nishbra emas. If you want to say they were broken already from before the holiday, then there should be no reason to prohibit using broken pieces of wooden utensils as fuel, because after all, when Yom Tov began, these broken pieces were already nothing but firewood. They were no longer utensils. Ela b'Yom Tov. Rather, it must be the case that these utensils broke on Yom Tov proper. The Katani, and yet the Brisa says, Masikin b'kelim masikin b'shivrei kelim. I can use as fuel a complete vessel, which is non-muksa, but I cannot use the broken pieces of an item that broke on Yom Tov, because these broken pieces now have the status of muksa and cannot be handled and cannot be used as fuel. 125. Pa'am on one occasion, halach Rabbi lemakom echad. Rabbi traveled to a certain place, umatzah nidbach shel avanim, and he saw some stones that had been left over from a construction project. V'yamal tamidav, and he said to his students, this was Friday. He said to his students, think about these stones, have in mind already from before the Sabbath, so that tomorrow, if we need to use them as chairs, we will be allowed to do so. But Rabbi did not require that his students take an action. It was simply enough for them to have a mental designation of these stones to be used as chairs. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Hitzrich and Rabbi Lamasa. However, Rabbi Yochanan has a different version of the story. in which he required the students to take an action, and that mental designation alone was insufficient. So what did he tell them to do? Rabbi Ami explained, he told them to position the stones in a certain way, and that would make them no longer muksa on account of being part of a construction site, but rather they had been designated ahead of time with mental designation and action that they should be available for usage on Shabbat. 126. The Mishnah tells us, I'm allowed to move 4 or 5 boxes of straw or grain in order to make room for a certain purpose, to accommodate guests at a meal, and to accommodate students at a yeshiva lecture. So we should not have the curtailment of yeshiva studies on account of lack of space. So we can move out boxes to make room for these purposes. It becomes clear from the Mishnah that what is allowed is extra exertion, that we ignore the general tendency to prohibit extra exertion on Shabbat, that in these instances it's okay, but we do not relax the muksa law itself. Now, why do we allow it in the case of orchim, of guests? The answer is because it is a mitzvah. And the Talmud tells us that hachnasat orchim is on the level of kabbalat pnei hashchina, receiving the divine presence. 127. Here the Gemara tells us that there are 6 things that a person benefits from in this world, and the primary aspect of the reward is available to him in the next world. A similar piece is recited in the daily davening after the blessings over Torah study. In this instance, the following items are mentioned. Hachnasat orchim, welcoming of guests. Bikur cholim, visiting the sick. Iyun tefillah, concentration in prayer. Hashkamat beit midrash, arriving early at the house of study. V'gadel banav Talmud Torah, you raise children to study the Torah. V'adana chavro l'kav zechut, and you judge your fellow favorably. If you do these 6 things, you shall benefit in this world, but the primary benefit will be in the world to come.